Dare to enter Crow's Quill's books, where tales of forgotten realms and fearless souls come alive. Today's journey: Plato Wyngard and the Armour of the Gods. Chapters 16 to 18 by Mark and James Lindsay. Will you uncover the truth hidden in the shadows? Chapter 16. Plato and his group continued to sail on for the next hour, unmolested. Teferi called Plato to the wheelroom as they pulled into the small docks of Narga Selassie. They were met by a group of curious onlookers as they tethered the cruiser to the rickety timber dock. Luther, armed, led the passengers off. At the sight of the large ex-marine, the locals scattered. "Must be that ugly mug of yours," Plato shrugged. "Definitely not the assault rifle," Luther replied. Minutes later, two priests ran down from the village, their faces etched with fear and concern. "Please don't hurt the children. We have nothing of value," one of the priests pleaded. At first, Plato and Luther could not understand the clergyman, but as they drew closer, the priest's demeanor and then vocalizations made their meaning clear. Luther was the first to sling his rifle, hands held up in a gesture meant to alleviate panic. Plato followed suit. "We mean you no harm," Plato said. This was repeated several more times before the looks of worry started to dissipate. The two priests were mirror opposites. One was a tall, elderly Caucasian man, tanned heavily from being outdoors, his eyes large and sad. He introduced himself as Father Tanner. The other priest, Father Becca, was a local, slim, medium height, young, barely out of the seminary. The real world had not yet knocked the fire from his eyes. Although they believed Plato and his team were not there to hurt anyone, they were still wary of the intentions of armed persons on their little island. "These people are the survivors of an attempted kidnapping," Plato stated. The priests appeared shocked, now taking a closer look at the rattled survivors and the heavily damaged cruiser. Father Becca yelled out something in Amharic. "What happened exactly?" Father Tanner asked. Villagers had started to creep down to the dock, some with food, others water. After receiving a reassuring nod from Father Becca, they approached the passengers and offered them what they had. Teferi was now exiting the cruiser, half carrying Nat, who was milking his injuries for all they were worth, plus tax. "I'd rather not say anything in front of others," Plato said. Father Tanner nodded. "Come up to the monastery. Bring your wounded man too. The others will be tended to by the village," Father Tanner said. The monastery was a large, circular building with tall, arched columns surrounding the exterior, built from stone with a thatched roof. It was simple but elegant in its design. The two priests escorted Plato and his team inside. The interior was stone and dark timber. There were religious paintings adorning the walls depicting Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and the Ark of the Covenant. Plato stopped to inspect one closer up. "Lake Tana is a very holy place. Mary passed through as well the Ark of the Covenant," Father Tanner said, as he continued to lead them to a private sitting room. They were offered seats, and a local nun administered additional aid to Nat's wounds. "Please tell us what happened," Father Tanner asked. Plato appeared reluctant. "Whatever you tell us will be held confidential." "It's not that. I just don't want to get you or your people hurt," Plato said. "The moment you stepped here, the possibility of harm from evil followed closely," Father Tanner said. "Damn, now I feel terrible," Luther said. "This would never prevent us from doing what is right," Father Becca added. "Regardless, my team and I would not wish to." Why don't you let us worry about that? Father Tanner said, with a sudden iron certainty. Plato spent the next 30 minutes detailing the events that had led them there, only leaving out certain names and organizations that were neither pertinent nor wise to mention. The only time the priest asked for pause was at the mention of the birds of Memnon. Once he had finished, the two priests asked to be excused briefly, without explanation. "What do you suppose they're doing?" Luther asked. "They are probably using a radio in the other room to call for help, to take care of us," Teferi said, pointing his index finger to his temple like a gun. "You don't really believe that, do you?" Plato asked. Teferi shrugged. "I know it must be hard, but try to have a little faith," Father Tanner said as he entered the room, carrying a large object under a canvas sheet. Plato blushed. "I'm sorry, Father." "Don't apologize. I would be a little paranoid as well under the circumstances," Father Tanner said. A few minutes later, Father Beta joined them. He too was carrying something, only this was smaller and concealed within a wooden box. This monastery was built by the Empress Mentewab in the 18th century, before Christ, and used to store many a treasure and royal artifact. Since then, so much so, that we have a lot of items stored away, Father Tanner said. "I don't see how this," Plato began. "Please let me finish," Father Tanner said. Plato nodded. "Over the years, I have spent countless hours toiling amongst the excess items, sometimes in wonder, sometimes in a state of confusion. These items fall in both categories," Father Tanner said, and removed the canvas sheet. Underneath the canvas was a large painting. It depicted a strapping black warrior, adorned in armor of what looked like sparkling silver and gold. The warrior held a magnificent short sword, similar in design to that used by the ancient Greeks. The blade was engraved with symbols and writing, the hilt encrusted with studded jewels. The warrior stood casually, with one foot atop a spectacular helm and an amused smile upon his face. The background was that of a large harbor and ocean. Plato and the others studied it for several minutes in silence. "It has that effect on you, doesn't it? The first time I saw it, I stared at it for an hour. That was many years ago, but I still pull it out from time to time," Father Tanner said. "It's King Memnon, isn't it?" Plato asked. "Yes, it is. A rather striking fellow, isn't he? I do believe that this portrait was actually painted with the king himself, posing prior to his departure for Troy," Father Tanner said. This admission by the old priest made the four men's earlier appraisal seem not worthy of the piece before them now. "As much as we all appreciate the art lesson, why?" Plato asked. Father Tanner smiled politely and nodded towards Father Beka, who opened the lid on the small wooden box, removing what appeared to be parchments. "After his death, it is said that in honor of his courage, the gods bled his corpse dry, and the blood formed a river," Father Beka said. "Again, interesting, but I don't see. I am a devout man, but my land is one that is steeped in magic and myth. Everyone from Mussolini to the King of Sparta has been through here. My people believe in a great many things. The birds of Memnon are fanatics, in every true sense of the word," Father Beka said. "How do you know this?" Luther asked. "You would be surprised what the average person in Ethiopia knows," Father Beka said. "So, what exactly do you know?" Teferi asked. "I know that the birds of Memnon want to bring back the glory to this land," Father Beka said. "How?" Plato asked. "They believe that in Memnon's armor they have the key," Father Beka said. Again, how? Plato pressed. That I don't know, Becca said. And the virgins. Why do they want the foreign girls? Luther asked. The two priests looked shocked by this revelation. There was a long silence. What do virgins have that others don't? Father Tanner asked. A lack of fun, Luther said, then grinned sheepishly at the priests. Purity, Plato added. That's right. In days of old, virgins were sacrificed all the time. Their purity an essential part of the ceremony. Blood, a symbol of this purity, Father Tanner whispered, the implications sinking in. Do you think? Yes, I think this is the case, Father Tanner said soberly. Why foreigners? Luther asked. Don't forget, these are fundamentalists. Why harm their own people? They probably believe outsiders are the viable solution, Father Becca said. You have to stop them. Whether what they think is true or not, they can't be allowed to sacrifice those girls, Father Tanner implored. We have no intention of allowing that to happen, Plato said with firm resolve. Father, we are alone and only have limited resources in a foreign country that's cracked politically and its law enforcement sketchy, to say the least. We can't be held up or tied to local police, answering questions we don't have the answers to, Plato hinted at. We have a boat, Father Becca said with a smile. The two priests led them down to the shore, where a dilapidated shed sat by the water. Eventually, Father Tanner won his battle with a rusty lock and led them inside. It's not much, but it will get you to the mainland, Father Tanner said. Inside the shed was a 5-man tin fishing boat, complete with an outboard motor. The motor works? Luther asked. Yes, but it won't break any water speed records, Father Becca said. I know it goes without saying, but if you could look after the passengers and tell the authorities something, Plato asked. Don't worry, we will be unintentionally confounding, Father Tanner said with a grin. They loaded the boat with everything they could think of that might leave clues to their visit and prepared to cast off. Nat, being the last, limped aboard. Do you think your friend should be going with you? Father Becca asked. He's tougher than he looks, and we really need him, Plato said. Besides, I doubt we could stop the runt, Luther said. Damn right, Nat added. One last thing. I do believe that this might be of use to you, Father Tanner said, and handed the small wooden box filled with parchments to Plato, who looked rather taken aback. You've done so much already. We couldn't. Please don't thank me too much. They're in ancient Greek. Just promise me you'll do everything you can to get the girls back, Father Tanner asked. Or die trying, Plato said without a doubt in his voice. Teferi started the boat, and they slowly pulled away from the shore. Good luck and Godspeed, Father Tanner called out as the boat puttered away. Chapter 17. Malekai's boat headed due east, arriving a couple of hours later outside the city of Fougera, a small town of farmers and cattlemen. His captive, Judy, wept quietly for the first hour, then went completely silent, fear making her nearly catatonic. They dragged the boats from the water, the still body of Judy slung over the shoulder of Malekai. Cattle roamed near the shore, a lone herder amongst them. His attention turned as the cattle were spooked by the black-clad figures. He approached to get a better look, his lean silhouette cautious but curious. In the distance, 3 desert-colored 4-wheeled drives and a large military troop carrier approached from the south, the vehicles kicking up dust as they drew nearer. Right on time, Malekai whispered. Grab the gear and dump the boats. His men went about their tasks silently and efficiently. Malekai placed Judy on the ground and waited for the vehicles to arrive. Judy had not shut down as her captors believed. Yes, she was terrified, but she was still functioning. The vehicles skidded to a halt. Thor climbed out of the lead vehicle and looked around. "Where are the rest of the girls?" Thor asked. "Your SAS friend," Malekai replied. "Plato. He always was an asshole," Thor said. "A lucky asshole. He very nearly got me today," Malekai said. "But at least I got this one. Judy, say hello to Thor." Without warning, Judy leapt to her feet and ran in the direction of the cattle, her screams for help echoing in the distance. Malakai's men were about to follow, but a wave from Malekai stopped them in their tracks. He alone followed at a casual walk. Judy ran as if the hounds of hell were following her. It was as if she were in a bad dream, tripping over her own feet, and the scary man who was only walking seemed to be gaining on her. "Somebody, help me!" Judy screamed. As she ran towards the cattle, the herder became wary. Judy could now see him, her screams louder and more urgent. He was right in front of her, his hands open as if to help her. Then he stopped and fell to his knees, eyes wide in shock. A small hole had appeared in the center of his forehead. A trickle of blood stained the grass. Judy skidded to a halt and watched in horror as the herdsman slumped over, dead. Looking over her shoulder, she saw the man known as Malekai lower his rifle with a wide, predatory grin on his face. Judy's scream turned to black. Malekai handed the unconscious girl to Thor, who loaded her into the back of his vehicle. "Was that really necessary?" Thor asked. "No, but she might as well have that adrenaline-pumping feeling of being alive before it's gone," Malekai answered. Thor thought he was bullshitting, suspecting the real reason being that the ex-guild member was in part insane. But then again, after everything he had seen in his time, he shouldn't be the one to throw stones. "What about Plato?" Thor asked. "We have a huge head start. Besides, for now anyway, that oaf has no idea where to go," Malekai said with certainty. "I've got food in the cab. You might want to have a bite and catch some shut-eye. It'll take us a couple of hours to reach Gondar," Thor suggested. Malekai nodded, though he doubted that he would be able to sleep, especially after killing someone. He always felt wired after he performed the act of murder, especially with an audience, the girl's terror only adding to the excitement. Thor signaled the convoy, and with a heavy rumble they departed off down the dirt road. Chapter 18, Plato thumbed through the scrolls and parchments in the back of the heavy troop carrier as it rolled out of Bahir Dar. "So where are we going?" Luther asked. "North. From what Teferi and I have managed to piece together, the final resting place of Memnon is northwest of Gondar," Plato said. "But haven't they already got the armor?" Not asked. "True, but I'm guessing there is still something to learn from the site," Plato replied. "Like where the site is?" Luther asked. "That's the million-dollar question," Plato mused. "I have a man who knows a man," Teferi said cryptically. They arrived at a modest dwelling 10 miles south of Gondar, located on a lonely hill, its nearest neighbor nowhere in sight. Teferi drove cautiously towards it along a narrow dirt road. "You haven't mentioned who this man is, or how he can help us," Plato pointed out. "No one knows his real name. He goes only by Tool. My contacts were able to track him down," Teferi said. "So, how is he going to help us?" Not asked. "He was involved in the dig that retrieved Memnon's armor," Teferi said, as he brought the troop carrier to a halt outside a plain timber hut. Plato climbed out. A shotgun blast kicked up the earth at his feet as he surveyed the surroundings. Dropping to a crouch, he drew his pistol and scanned the area. Luther, Nat, and Teferi followed suit. "Tool, we mean you no harm," Teferi called out. Another blast filled the air in response. Plato looked at his team, then holstered his weapon. "What the hell are you doing?" Luther growled. Plato ignored his friend and slowly stood up, his hands held up in a non-threatening gesture. "My colleague is telling the truth. We only want to talk. You can see by our weapons. If we wanted to do you harm, we would have done so, before now," Plato said. There was a long pause. "I don't care who you are. Go," a voice called out. "We're not with the birds of Memnon," Plato answered. "I don't know what you're talking about," the voice retorted. "You can play dumb, but I'm betting that one day soon, Malekai and his men will come for you," Plato said, and lowered his hands. "But you know that, don't you?" A figure emerged from the hut, holding an old, double-barreled shotgun. It was pointed in the direction of Plato, but its owner appeared to lack any conviction. "Just leave," the figure implored. "We can't. It's a matter of life and death," Plato said. The figure seemed to be having an inner battle over what he was going to do. After a long silence, he turned and started to walk back to the hut. "Come on then. If I'm going to die, let's get it over with," the figure stated. Plato and his team entered the hut and found Tool sitting at a small table, his shotgun leaning against the far wall. Tool was a thick-set man in his late 50s, balding, with short-cropped, iron-gray hair and heavily lined features. Tool raised a large, calloused hand and pointed a finger at Plato. "Well, what are you waiting for?" Tool demanded. "Look, as I said before, we have no intention of harming you. We just need answers," Plato said. Tool motioned for them to take a seat. "Did you gentlemen know that I've been involved in digging in one form or another on the Dark Continent for over 40 years? My father did it, and so did his. You could say that I have dirt running in my veins," Tool said. "We've come about Memnon's armor," Tool finished. "Yes, can you help us?" Plato asked. "I'll do better. I'll show you," Tool replied. 2 hours later, they were 60 miles northwest of Gondar, in the middle of nowhere. A rather unimpressive stretch of dirt and rock. Unimpressive, except for what appeared to be an abandoned campsite complete with large marquee-style tents and earth-moving equipment. They all stared out of the vehicle's windows, tense, not sure what awaited them. Teferi and Tool remained with the vehicle, the Safari Club agent ready to deploy the troop carrier's twin machine gun arsenal if there was even a hint of trouble from the sight. Plato, Luther, and Nat advanced slowly on a 90-degree angle from the vehicle, their weapons raised. Plato scanned the area. Tent canvas flapped noisily in the wind. Flies buzzed even more noisily within. As they moved closer, the smell hit them. Dead bodies lined the floor. Workers, diggers, men like Tool. "Cripes, that's rank," Plato muttered. Luther nodded, not wanting to open his mouth. The three of them backed out. "Teferi, the area is clear. Come in," Plato said into his radio. In the center of the campsite was a large tunnel leading down into the ground. Plato and the team descended beneath the earth. The huge entrance allowed them easy entry. The air inside was thick with dust, and the torch beams had trouble cutting through. They wrapped their shemas around, covering their noses and mouths for ease of breathing. The tunnel continued down for a further 20 meters on a gradual decline, heavy timber beams bracing the passage. They took their time, Plato taking note of every detail as they passed. "We're here," Toole said. The tunnel opened up into a large patch of darkness. "Hold here." Toole motioned for them to stop as he walked a small way in. They lost sight of him. They could hear him tinkering in the darkness, followed by a quick whumping noise. It sounded 2 more times, then came the slow rumble of a motor. It revved several times, then settled into a steady roar. They waited and watched, then light erupted in the darkness. They could now see Toole operating a generator, powering 3 large floodlights. He turned to them and gave a theatrical bow. "Welcome to the resting place of King Memnon," Toole announced. The antechamber was quite large, about 6 meters high and 10 meters across. As they crossed the threshold, they noticed 2 stone figures seated rigidly on either side of the entrance, their heads nearly brushing the ceiling. They looked stoic and regal. "They look identical to the 2 in Luxor," Teferi said. "That's right, the Colossi of Memnon," Toole replied. "Why are there 2?" Luther asked. "There is a lot of conjecture that the ones in Luxor aren't of Memnon, but rather Pharaoh Amenhotep III. I think it's more aesthetic to have a pair, or maybe something to do with the afterlife. The real question would be, why the ones in Luxor?" Plato said, "as a testament to his bravery or his honor." "No, I believe it was so no one would come here and discover his true resting place and find the armor," Toole said. Plato turned to face the digger. "What did the armor look like?" Plato asked. Toole's eyes lit up. It lay beside him within his sarcophagus, and despite the years, it was untarnished, sparkling like the sun, gold and silver. It was beautiful. When Malekai held aloft the crown, I'm ashamed to say I dropped to my knees, as did the other workers. We all felt divine workings, Toole said self-consciously. "What of his sword?" Plato asked. "There was no sword," Toole replied, a little puzzled. Plato stared at Memnon's resting place. "What's the matter?" Not asked. "Do you remember the painting the priests showed us?" Plato asked. The others nodded. The armor Toole described sounds exactly the same as what was depicted in the painting, except for the sword. That jeweled sword, Luther said. "Where is the sword?" Teferi asked. They scoured the antechamber, looking for any answers that might indicate where the sword might be. Malekai and his men had been rough when unearthing Memnon. Small explosives used to retrieve the sarcophagus had destroyed the walls. Any writings, gone. Plato studied the twin statues. They bore no writing, but were very detailed in their depiction of the king. "If there's any clues, I'm buggered if I can find them," Plato confessed. "Maybe there is no clue," Luther offered. "You're probably right, just grasping at straws. A pity, that statue where he's holding a sword in his left hand. It would be too easy if that was the actual sword." Plato mused. "It's funny how artisans get the small things wrong sometimes," Teferi added. "What do you mean?" Plato asked. "When you mentioned his left hand, I just remembered the painting the priests have of Memnon. The sword was in his right," Teferi said. "Say that again," Plato asked. "The sword was in his right hand," Teferi said. "Are you sure?" Plato pressed. "Positive." "What's your point?" Not asked. "Maybe nothing," Plato muttered, and closely examined the right forearm of the first statue, which was bare, but covered in a thick layer of sand. Toole produced a brush from a rolled-up leather hide that he carried as one of his tools of the trade. He handed it to Plato, who immediately brushed away the sand and dirt. After a minute, he stopped. "Shine the light?" Plato asked. Nat moved in close and shone his torch. 2 letters were visible, faint but readable. OS. What does that mean? Luther asked. I don't know, Plato muttered. Try the other one. Both Teferi and Luther did the same on the other statue. After a minute of cleaning, they called Plato over. Again, Nat shone his torch. This time there was a word. Sculptura. I'm confused. Is that like sculpting? Luther asked. Latin. Yes, it does mean sculpting, but like a lot of words, it has multiple meanings as well, Plato said with a smile. Does it make sense to you? Nat asked. On its own, no, but the OS is somewhat illuminating. In Latin, it means bone. Bone sculpting or bone carving. That's very interesting. I think it's time to have a closer look at the skeleton of Memnon, Plato said. Plato leaned on the sarcophagus and peered in at the bones of Memnon, specifically the right radius and ulna. Holy cow, would you look at that? Luther whispered. Shining the torch into the stone coffin, the 4 of them peered in and saw small, neat carvings on the ulna. Again, they were written in Greek. Memnonis prosadit gladius ex alto boreae. Can you translate? Teferi asked. Yes, but it doesn't make much sense, Plato replied. What does it say? Luther pressed. Memnon's sword rests with Boreas on high, Plato said. Who the hell is Boreas? Nat asked. I have no idea, Plato said. I do, Toole interjected. Boreas is the Greek god of the north wind, the bringer of winter. Not much help here in Africa. No snow, only dry, bloody heat, Nat said with a scowl. Actually, that's not entirely right, Teferi said. East of here lie the Simeon Mountains. They receive regular snow. They are a treacherous range. Not many can make the journey. Many tribes are hidden within, Toole said. If what you say is true, I'm betting Boreas is located at the very highest peak. We have some climbing to do, Plato said. That seals today's tale in shadows. We hope Plato Wyngard and the Armour of the Gods has drawn you deeper into its enigma. Return soon to Crow's Quills books, where the next chapter awaits, whispering secrets yet untold.